Michelle.
Hello, Claire. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. How's your weather in New Jersey?
It is gorgeous. Finally, it's gorgeous.
Wow, that's only something you can say half the year or less than half the year?
It depends what you consider gorgeous.
Okay, so I want to just read your bio for folks who don't already kind of know everything about you, just sort of quickly, so you can, stare off into the distance or do whatever you do when people are reading your bio. Some folks find it exceedingly awkward. So Michelle Tillis Lederman, named one of Forbes' top 25 networking experts, is the author of 3 books, including The 11 Laws of Likeability and her latest, Nail the Interview, Land the Job. Michelle is the CEO of Executive Essentials, which provides custom communication and leadership training and coaching programs. Michelle has appeared on places like NBC, CBS, Fox, Gayle King, NPR, and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Working Mother, U.S. News and World Report, Monster.com, USA Today, CNBC, and About.com. She holds degrees from Lehigh University and Columbia Business School. Connect with her on Twitter and Facebook, and we'll share sort of those links about how folks can connect with you at the end of the talk. Sound good?
Great.
So I want to start by kind of digging into this idea of likability, and particularly kind of how it relates to this concept of profit. And it's interesting because you and I were just talking right before we started recording, and you were saying how kind of this word profit in some ways, when connected with likability, makes you sort of pull back a little and say, hey, what is that really a word that should be connected with likability? So I'd love if you could just sort of tell us a little bit about that reaction you had, because I think it was pretty interesting.
It surprised me as well. I always talk about real relationships lead to real results. And I know when we talk about results, there is a financial component to it. That makes sense. I guess in my own head and heart, I didn't take it all the way there. Because when I think about results, I might think about getting the meeting, or I might think about getting, in the door, that connection that my second book was because of my sister running into her ex-boyfriend from middle school at a restaurant. I mean, it was just, I love those organic ways that things happen through relationships. And yes, the end result is result, which could be the sale, the job, the money. But I think for me, I just love the weaving of all of it and able to attribute the successes that we have through the relationships that we make.
And so for you, maybe the word profit is, I don't know, maybe a little bit kind of dark or something in terms of when compared to relationships, essentially.
And I hear, and I probably did have a little bit of that reaction, and I don't want to at all say that profit is a bad thing. It is not. I think it was just too specific. And I think I want people to stay open to what the result might be and understanding that those results aren't linear.
Right.
And so our results come through an evolution and a maze of these relationships. And the result, yes, is however we're defining success, whether it is, again, the job, the sale, the increased salary, the whatever it might be. But profit, I think, is just one piece of the puzzle. And I just kind of wanted to bring the conversation up.
Okay. So let's back up and talk a little bit sort of about likability as a general concept and how that relates to really everything you do and why you are where you are today, sitting in your home office, talking to me with all these clients and, all these sort of press appearances behind you.
Well, one of the things I realized when I wrote the book is you can't make anybody like you. And people often will come up and be like, oh, I need to be more likable. I'm like, well, I can't teach you how to be more likable. But what I can teach you is to understand what drives likability, what drives connection, to enable you, to enable others to see what is likable about you. But there's just going to be people out there that don't like you. There's people out there that don't like me. And it took me a long time to accept that. I was the one so a little bit of background about me. I'm a recovering CPA. I spent over a decade.
CPA.
I spent over a decade in the finance career. I was the only woman on a trading floor. I was the only woman on a global venture capital team. You know, I was intense. Just ask my husband. I was intense. That's why we probably didn't date right away.
That's like the title of a book. I was intense. That's great.
And when I started to transition into this training career, there would be one person in the room that I didn't have. I knew, like that one back there in the corner that was still on her phone, or she was making faces, or she was rolling her eye. I didn't have her. And instead of focusing on 99% of the room that was with me, that was engaged, that was soaking up the learning, that wanted to be there, I would hyper focus on this one that I didn't have because I would feel it in my gut, like, she doesn't like me, you know?
Huh. Yeah.
And so for me, and for everybody else out there listening who can relate to that, I want you to say that's okay. I want you to say that you don't have to chase them all. Not everyone's going to like you. And when you start to accept that, you can then focus on the relationships that are real, that can connect, that can grow, that can sustain, instead of chasing ones that are really not viable.
I mean, I love that, because that is something that I definitely suffer with, and I think lots of entrepreneurs suffer from or suffer with, whatever it is. That's fascinating. Just this idea that, and we get it, especially now with just sort of our lives being so online, and it's so easy to immediately see if someone doesn't like you, and even if it's someone who just writes a bad comment on your blog post or sends you a not so perfect tweet or whatever it is, and that's what you obsess on, and that's what you think about. It's so interesting.
Well, so I also want to give the flip side to that, because we rush to judgment. Mm-hmm. So I want you to be careful with our assumptions about that person doesn't like me, let me write them off. Because I will remember a woman I went to business school with who I thought was one of those. Now, she was like 6 feet tall, former model, grew up with a silver spoon in her mouth, like everything I'm not. I'm 4'10". You know, I grew up as a have-not, you know, certainly not a model. Mm-hmm. And no silver spoon. And when she would walk past me and not speak to me and literally look down her nose at me because she was so much taller, I just was so turned off by her. Didn't like her in my gut, probably because I felt she didn't like me, or maybe she felt I wasn't good enough. But these were all assumptions. I ended up on spring break trip with her, ended up sharing a room with her and 2 other girls, and learned that the woman was shy. And learned what an amazing heart she had, and learned like that I was going to be a bridesmaid in her wedding. Wow. Because you have to be open to being wrong with your assumptions. So when you do have that person in the back of the room or in that meeting or something you don't have, check your assumption. Like, I'll go up and I'll say, is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to make, you know, the experience, you know, more on par with what you're looking for? And if they're not meeting me halfway, I let them be. But I will at least go and check. I can't tell you how many times I've been wrong. Back in my NYU days, I had a student, and these were intense classes. I was teaching the part-time MBA, so they were working all day and coming to class nights and weekends. And I had a guy, he always sat in the front row and he looked angry. He just looked angry. And one of the Saturdays I was having lunch in the classroom, and so was he. And he turns around and he starts talking to me, and he was really excited. And I'm just like, oh my God, I thought you hated this class. And he's like, oh no, the class is amazing. I hate public speaking. It's my biggest fear in life, but the class is amazing. And I was like, huh. He actually ended up in my book because he emailed me like 2-3 years later after the class to tell me about how that class impacted his work in China.
Wow.
And he was presenting to a Chinese audience. And it was just like, so be open to being wrong. And check your assumptions.
That's okay. So what you're talking about in some of these stories also indicates sort of your ability to kind of give to others, which I think is a powerful part of who you are. And so I want to talk to you a little bit, or ask you a little bit about this law of giving. You say in your book that, you know, your grandmother used to laugh and say, "Oi, what I do for you," or whatever. And
wait, you got to get the accent right. It's, "Oi, what I do for you."
Okay, right. Yeah, I'm not, I don't have the Yiddish accent down very well, apparently. Indicating, though, that she always did more for you than you could ever imagine, and that you could never sort of pay her back or anything like that. In contrast, though, you say that success really comes from doing for others and, paying back and paying forward and whatever it is. So talk to me about what this law of giving is and what this means.
This is my heart. I love when people ask about this one. And it's really interesting. When I first wrote the book, the chapter was called The Law of Reciprocity.
Oh.
Because the concept, around getting results was that when you give, people want to give back. And they usually want to give back in greater amounts. But I really struggled, and I was very frustrated. And I was like, it wasn't landing for me. And I realized I didn't want people to focus on the reciprocity piece of it. I wanted people to focus on the giving piece of it. And so I changed the concept to give first, give often, give because you can, give because you want to, and give without expectation. Giving creates value. And I actually gave away the entire chapter end to end for free. You'll have the links up at the end, because I believe that if people follow this concept, everybody's results will increase because it's exponential. And as we talked about before, it's nonlinear. When you give, you show a lot of things to somebody else. You show that you are somebody who wants to give, somebody who wants to create value for somebody else, somebody who listened to understand how they could create value for somebody else, and somebody who's putting that effort in. And so that's a really strong message that you're giving to somebody else of you're worth it. And when you make somebody else feel that way, they want to stay in that world. Hey, you made me feel good about myself. I want to be in your world because you make me feel good. And so it creates that desire for an ongoing connection. And the more you have that exchange happening, the more familiar, the more comfortable, the more similar, the stronger the roots of the relationship grow. So giving is very foundational. It's a mindset. And there's a lot of ways to think about giving. It doesn't have to be as narrow as we probably are thinking right now.
I mean, okay, so right, this idea of it not being as narrow as we think of it right now makes me think of this story that I've heard that, Jeff Walker, he's, an internet guy or whatever, and he has a story about early on in his career, him doing something kind of small for someone. I mean, it wasn't super small, but, relatively small, spending about half an hour of his time to respond to an email, essentially, and giving a lot of information. And then in return, this person just going above and beyond and giving them this incredibly generous gift, essentially. And the story is fantastic, but I think when you read it, it kind of makes you think, oh, so giving is only about these really grand gestures. And, you kind of say something different. You have this quote where you say, giving creates value. It doesn't always mean exerting major effort or making grand gestures, essentially. So tell me more about that, because sometimes I think we think, oh, we can't give that big thing, so why bother?
Sometimes there's nothing you can give. And for me, the story that resonates the most, there's two that come to mind. One was a woman that I was at the Columbia Women in Business Conference. She was a speaker. I was still kind of thinking about my transition out of finance, but I was still very much in finance, but just with the dream. And I was like, oh my God, she's awesome. Oh, I need to know her. And, it's an all-day conference. I got up my time standing next to her, chatted her up a little bit, and I was like, okay, she really is awesome. Got at her table at lunch and kept talking. And I eventually said, can I take you out to lunch? Sometimes all you can give is a free cup of coffee or a meal to be able to receive their wisdom. And she gave me 2 hours. She gave me 2 hours over lunch of her time. And I attribute something she said to my courage in launching and actually flipping the switch and going out on my own. And, when somebody does something like, for her, it was a conversation. For me, it was courage. And I wanted to give back so badly, and I had nothing. And we stayed in touch over the years, and I was always like, what are you working on? And I had nothing. There's nothing I could do for her. And it took 5 years of us with an email here or a phone call there, each of the years, until we ran into each other when I moved to New Jersey. And I learned that she was starting a different practice in her business. What I was doing.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
And all of a sudden, I could give in a really big way. I made connections for her. I got her on the faculty at Rutgers. I got her on the faculty of the American Management Association. We did a program together at MetLife. I helped her with pricing. I helped her with program development. I was like, it was huge the way I was able to help her. It just took me 5 years.
Wow.
But over that 5 years, she knew that I had that mindset. I might ask the questions. I might show interest and curiosity about what she was doing and what she needed and if there was a way I could help. And maybe that's enough sometimes.
Maybe that's enough. I love that. Because I think sometimes we think we don't have enough value to give to someone, especially, in that example, she was this really big deal, someone you really wanted to talk to, and you felt for years that you didn't have something to give. So, I mean, you have a quote that says, don't underestimate your ability to bring value to someone else. And that seems right there.
But if you even think about that, and the other story I was thinking about was when I was introduced to a CEO. I mean, a really successful, he's on his third company, IPO'd the first two, he's a big deal. And when somebody offered an introduction, I had to pick my jaw up with the floor, and I'm like, yes, please, And that was probably over 10 years ago that I got this introduction, and he and I are still friends. I do consider him a mentor. And it was fascinating to me that in our second meeting, my first meeting was me pitching him my business idea and him totally knocking it down and then buying me a lovely lunch. The second meeting was at his office where he was starting this new company, the second one he built. And me being clueless, because it was like a tech thing. And I'm like, I don't know. But what I did instead was listened, showed curiosity, and asked questions. And in the middle of the meeting, he does one of these. And he's like, Michelle, you've given me a lot to think about. And I'm thinking, seriously? Me? I don't know what I'm talking about. But a well-placed question can be a gift. And it was amazing how, it just spiraled from there, because I then left, even though I didn't know anything about technology, my husband did. And so I emailed my husband. I'm like, he's trying to do this. Do you have any advice? And he emails me back, and I was like, what else? It took me 3 minutes. It took my husband maybe 5. I sent a nice email, comprehensive, here's some ideas. He could have done it himself. But it's that idea that you might put a little effort in for somebody else.
Right.
Instead of saying, hey, there was an article, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
You might go and find that article and send the link.
Right.
So small little tokens. When I saw Amy 5 years later, the Columbia Women in Business woman, I told her that it was because of her that I had sat with, at this point in my life, it's probably been like about 500 people, but at that time it was probably over 100 that had wanted to start their own business. And I gave her credit, and I gave her recognition, and I gave her thanks. And my God, if that is not giving to somebody else,
right?
Who doesn't love a little appreciation?
Absolutely. Right? So when you think about how likability and profit sort of connect, it sounds like in a lot of these stories, what we're talking about is the way that likability helps you build relationships, and those relationships basically create long-term potential for some type of success or career advancement, right?
Well said, but I will get a little more tactical for you. Okay. And I will say that when it comes to the sale or the client, people would rather do business with someone they like, someone they know, someone they trust, someone they're comfortable with, over somebody who's got a cheaper product, over somebody who's got a better quality product. I'd rather work with the individual, and I will make that choice as the differentiating factor in my decision making for who gets the profit.
So how do we use that to our advantage as, someone who sells something or writes a book or wants to coach or wants to speak? How do we use this to our advantage?
So again, I'm having a visceral reaction to the phrase, use it to our advantage.
Yeah. Right.
It's interesting because I almost called the book Organic Networking, but I thought it sounded too frou-frou. But it was the idea of not always knowing what the end game is. That said, always being clear on what your current goals are. Those current goals don't have to be with every single interaction. It could be, hey, this is what I'm working on. I don't know how you might connect to that. So give me the phrase again, because I just reacted to it. But
So how do we use this idea of likability to our advantage was my phrase.
Okay. So what I would tell you is build the relationships that you want to build. Mm-hmm. Be clear on what you're trying to accomplish. Share it. Talk about it. Enable people to help you with it. If they ask you, be prepared to answer the question. This is how you can help. And when you are building these relationships, do take that long-term perspective, as you said. It doesn't mean you don't have clarity of what you're working on right now, but you don't want to look at a relationship and be like, can you do something for me right now? No, bye-bye.
Right. Absolutely.
That doesn't work. Right now, I'm launching my third book. I'm actually officially launching it, although it's been out on Amazon for a little while. Mm-hmm. I never really did a launch. I have been part of an authors group of women who's written books, and I've supported them over the last several years. And now that I'm putting this out saying, hey, I'm launching, the response has been ridiculous. Like, brought me to tears, like, filled my heart. And I didn't even know I was going to write this third book when I was helping other people. It's about not knowing necessarily where it's going to lead. But when you have an ask, make sure you ask.
When you have an ask, make sure you ask. I love that. So how do you keep in touch? How do you manage sort of how do you manage these relationships? Let's say, someone like Amy, you said you meet her, you have that 2-hour lunch, and then over 5 years, you have this sort of emailing and occasional phone calling. How do you manage those? I mean, I assume you're pretty intentional about it or not, or do you just sort of let it come and go as it happens organically?
I do a little bit of both. So there are some people like the Amy's that probably I'll, after this call, go send her an email saying, hey, I was talking about you today. I've sent many emails that just say, hey, you just popped into my mind. What's going on with you? Just to say I was thinking about you, not to say anything more than kind of keeping in their mind and reminding them that I'm in their world. I do use social media as a way to stay in people's mind. I do use different techniques. Like if I'm on the phone with somebody, I'll say, hey, when do you want to reconnect? And I'll go forward to my calendar 2 months or 2 years.
Right.
And put a note saying, reconnect with such and such. So that's the kind of the tactical is I will make sure that their name pops up again in my calendar. And then sometimes it's just, oh, they popped up in my head. I'm going to actually follow that thought through with an email.
That's great. And how did you sort of develop this? Is this just something that is kind of natural to you and so you knew how to do it? Or where did you learn to do this?
Where did I learn to do what?
Where did you learn to network well, essentially? Keep relationships top of mind. Make sure the Amy's of the world don't just have that one great lunch and then just sort of never hear from you again.
It's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me. I don't think that people are natural networkers. I think that a lot of times people view extroverts as they're really great at networking. And I have a whole section in the book, which is good news for the introvert, because they actually have skill sets that are probably more valuable in building relationships than the extrovert. Extroverts might be good at working a room or going up to strangers, but introverts are really good at the one-to-one and really good at listening and probing and going deeper. And that's where we want to be. So I don't think there is one style that works. And what I try to talk about with this concept of relationship networking is to understand the way in which you connect best, embrace that, and stretch it. If you're somebody who hates the big room, I don't want you to avoid it completely, but I want you to navigate it in a way that you're comfortable.
Right.
If you're somebody who's always the talker, I want you to shut up and focus on listening a little bit. Understand where your growth and your stretch is in your networking. I actually do a what type of networker quiz are you, and we'll add that to the links at the end.
Oh, perfect. So as we sort of close out this topic, I'm wondering if there's kind of one takeaway you could give to someone who's just sort of trying to understand what it means to be likable and how that might relate to, increasing their profits or, getting past that career ceiling they're in, if there's sort of one thing you could say, hey, try to do this today or this week or this month or this year that might help them.
Self-disclosure.
Oh.
That was not the answer I expected to come out of my mouth as I listened to that question. But I think it encompasses a lot of things. And self-disclosure is the idea of being vulnerable, of being authentic, of allowing others to see more of you. And it's a risk.
Wow.
And it's scary.
Wow.
But when you do, you give trust to somebody else. And that might make them, it won't necessarily, but it does inspire others to provide that trust back, to give that appreciation, to feel valued. And this is the concept of mood memory. When you make somebody feel that way, it's a platform for building. I mean, I'm going to a brand new client on Wednesday. We're having a meeting, just signed this client, and I'm like, I have to watch Grey's Anatomy before we get together because I know she watches this show. Because we're going to talk about politics and Grey's Anatomy. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And eventually we'll get to the fact that they want to do more work with me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's so great, right? And the ever important tip to remember to watch Grey's Anatomy is also critical. 10 years later. That's fantastic. Can you tell us what you're working on now and where people can find out more about some of the awesome stuff you do and where people can connect with you?
I have loads of ways that people can connect with me. And I promised on this thing a couple of things. I promised you a free networker assessment, a free chapter of the book. For those that are in the job search, I've got the interview prep checklist. I don't know, there's probably some other goodies that I send out. If they go to my website, Michelle, Michelle, Tillis, Tillis, Lederman, LEDERMAN.com/gift pack. They'll get it all. One link. And you get all of it. You get a series of videos, a lot in the first month, and then I slow it down with ongoing video tips. The get known, get ahead, get known, get connected, get ahead. I gotta be able to say that off the tongue. Hopefully, we'll be out by the time that this goes live. And if you go to my website, I'm sure I'll have some kind of announcement about it, or you can Google Get Known, Get Connected, Get Ahead, and the video series. And I usually give any listener to a summit a discount. I don't know what the code is going to be, but let's just say, 97 off. I got to write that down somewhere. 97 off will be the code, and you'll get the series for $97. I don't know. I'm making this up off the top of my head. You know it's not out yet. But you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. On Facebook, go to the author speaker page, not the friend page, because I'm not letting you see how big my hair was in the 80s.
And what's your handle on Twitter? What's your Twitter username?
At MT Lederman, and it's LEDERMAN. It sounds like David Letterman. We say it the same, but spell it differently.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this. This was super inspiring, and I think folks are going to get a ton out of it. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.